What's good, sports fans? Welcome to another edition of the Buzzer Beater on the Buffoon Sports Talk Network. I'm your host, Troy Alexander. I've got a very special, I want to say guest, but he's one of my best friends. Not only does he know about the history of this topic that I'm going to be talking about today, but he's a fellow Arizonan of mine and a Phoenix Suns fan. My good buddy, Nathan Gleason. What's up, my dude?
Yeah, what's up, everyone? Glad to be on the show.
So, I just want to dive right in. So, us living in Arizona, I mean, how long would you say? I know kind of what's the right word for it? I don't want to say fanhood has died down, but I would say like, maybe not as big of as a Suns fan anymore, but I know back in the day you were a gigantic Suns fan. Do you still kind of keep up with the Suns?
Yeah, so they've been really exciting the last couple years. I probably started watching them again, sometime around 2016, 2017. Booker had already emerged after, being on the All-NBA rookie team. It looked like the pieces were coming together. They had some pretty exciting draft picks, when they got, failed draft picks now, but, Dragan Bender and Marquise Chris, like, it looked like the Suns were on their way to becoming a new team. They officially had decent draft picks. They weren't stuck with the 14th or 15th pick every year. So I don't know. It just seemed like things were going right for the Suns. And then, of course, the bubble exploded everyone's excitement for the Suns this year. And now that they have Chris Paul, I think everyone's looking, toward, for the 2020 season to see what they can do. And I think they're going to shock some people.
Right. So I know I just dived right in. I just want to give a quick rundown of what this is going to kind of be about. Like, I'm huge with history on stuff, and especially with the NBA, it being my favorite sport, basketball being my favorite sport, and the NBA being my favorite league. I love to talk about dynasties and kind of decade after decade, how this decade slash whatever you want to call it has influenced current teams and current styles of play. So I want to go back to Chris Paul though. So Suns land Chris Paul this offseason, not even 2 weeks ago, maybe.
Yep.
And probably their best point guard since Steve Nash.
Yep.
Initial thoughts. What were yours?
Well, initially, I think we pay him a lot of money, but thank God Robert Sarver actually ponied up the dough for a good player. I think we get an immediate improvement on both points per game and even assists. I did like Rubio. I thought Rubio was good, but he averaged 11 points a game and 8 assists, which is serviceable. Facilitating the ball, but not going to create his own shot. He's not going to be a factor offensively unless the people he's passing the ball to are actually scoring, which, we all know is not easier said than done. So in that regard, yeah, huge upgrade. I'm sad to see Uber go, but, you had to give up something to land Chris Paul. But I think the chemistry between Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and Ayton is I think it's going to be awesome. We finally have a big three in Phoenix that we can really stand behind. So, yeah, huge upgrade.
So a few things on that. Like my initial thoughts were people like I heard a lot of Suns fans say we should go after Westbrook. We should go after player A, player B. And you know me, I'm not a big Westbrook fan. I'm just not. I'm not big on guys that can't get their own shot, especially a jump shot in today's league. Yep. And I understand he's younger than Chris Paul. I understand that. I think they make around the same type of money, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
A lot of money.
But Chris Paul, despite some injuries in his playoff career, is one of the most efficient players in NBA history. I'm talking with the likes of LeBron James, most efficient players. I love Chris Paul. I think that you can say they sold high and they maybe did give up a lot for Chris Paul, but as a team, when you have a franchise player like Devin Booker, you have to show him something. You can't just when was he drafted? 2014 or 2015? It was one of those years.
15.
Okay. So they've never been close to scratching the playoffs, really, except for this past season. You have to show your star player you're serious about winning. You can't, and especially in today's NBA where superstars, if you want to call them a superstar, star/superstar, you got to show them you're serious about winning or they're going to want out. That's just how it is in today's NBA. So Robert Sarver, owner of the Suns, had to show Booker, hey, look, man, I'm serious about winning. I'm going to get you someone. And he did. He got Chris Paul, a guy that can shoot. He can still defend serviceably at his age. And I look at their starting lineup. Well, we can try to map out their starting lineup real quick before we move on. They also signed Jay Crowder, which I loved. You can say they maybe paid him $10 million a year, which maybe was a little high considering his subpar playoffs with the Heat this past season. But you get a guy in Jay Crowder that can defend threes and can also shoot the three, which opens the floor more for Devin Booker. So I look at their starting lineup. Chris Paul, Devin Booker, and this is where it gets interesting. Because who's going to play the three? Is it going to be Crowder or is it going to be Michael Bridges? And then you have to decide what you're doing with Dario Saric, who they just paid more money to. And then your five is obviously DeAndre Ayton. Yep. So you still have 6 guys right there that you can do something. I love their starting lineup.
What about Cam Johnson?
I think Cam's going to be coming off the bench. I think you still need someone to run the second unit. And, I mean, I know I don't know how serious they are about Cameron Payne either, because they still have Payne. So the second unit's interesting. They also let Aaron Baines walk, which I personally loved Aaron Baines, a guy who's a good post defender who shoots the three at the 5 spot. I mean, that's invaluable in today's league, man. You need anytime you have a big guy that can stretch the floor and defend the post. I mean,
totally.
So I don't know. I love their starting 5. I mean, so let me ask you this before we move on. Playoff team?
Oh, definitely. Do they make, the top of the playoffs, or are they 1 through 4 seed? I don't know, but I mean, they're definitely making the playoffs. It's just a matter of where and how quickly they mesh with their chemistry. If their chemistry comes alive like we think it will, I don't see how they don't, take the Western Conference by storm.
Okay. I mean, I kind of I think they're like a 5 or 6 seed. That's what I see.
I think at the best, maybe 3. I mean, think about what OKC did with a lot less talent, with a lot less firepower. If Chris Paul can bring that team together, I don't know how he can't take this team to maybe the 4th seed, maybe even the 3rd. Obviously, they're not going to be the 1 seed. There's too much talent in the West, but they could surprise some people. And the Suns have proven time and time again that, especially in the past, that they were a great regular season team. Unfortunately, it's just they fell short in the playoffs. So hopefully this year isn't going to be that way, but I'm expecting to have a really good record. If I had to guess, I'm going to say they're a 55 win team.
Wow.
I think they're going to torch the regular season.
Damn. Okay. That's interesting. I would probably say I could see them winning 50 games. I wouldn't be shocked if they won 50 games. But I want to go back to what you were saying about fell short in the playoffs. So you have when we think of like the classic Suns in the mid 2000s, you think of 7 seconds or less Suns. Yep. And you think about what they've done and how they've influenced just how the league is played today. Like that just gets me really interested in turning back the clock like 15 years. And when you think of those Suns, Steve Nash, Sean Marion at the 4, Stoudemire at the 5, can you go back 15 years and kind of give us give me and everybody listening kind of like a history of the Suns and what they did for us.
All right, so let's go back to '04. Let's go the '04 at the very end of the '03-'04 season. We pushed the reset button. We were going hard on Stephon Marbury. We knew that Marion was the future and that Amari Stoudemire had just won Rookie of the Year. And we decided to blow that team up because it wasn't competitive. We couldn't take down the West. The bigs were too big, too strong. We had no answer for Shaq. I mean, let's be real.
No one did. No one
Jake
did.
Boswell was our starting center. You know who our enforcer was? It was Bo Outlaw. Bo Outlaw came off the bench every time we played Shaquille O'Neal. So, I mean, between Shaq, Tim Duncan, and, the emergence of Yao Ming, we had no answer for a half-court game. So what was our decision? Negate the half-court game. Completely make it irrelevant. So when you make it irrelevant and you speed up the game, guys like Shaquille O'Neal are stuck on the other side of the court while you're already scoring. Fast forward a couple hundred times down the court, and he's a non-factor. And we saw that later on in his career. But, it took the vision of Mike D'Antoni to make that happen. And, trading for Steve Nash was the difference maker. So, we needed a floor general. We needed someone to take over the point guard position. At that time we had no one. I mean, we were really, they thought that Joe Johnson was going to be the point guard. That was the plan, was to make Johnson a point forward. And I hate to say we knew that was going to be a disaster, but that was the plan before landing Steve Nash. And Mark Cuban let him walk. He knew that he didn't want to pay Nash what he was asking for. And so, they figured out their own game plan and let us take him for almost nothing. I mean, if you look at his contract back then to today, I mean, it's a joke. I mean, he was making about $10 million a year. Any team could have signed him if they knew what they had on their hands. And it took the vision of D'Antoni to make that happen. So, D'Antoni was a famous European coach. He had won EuroLeague championships. And he knew that this type of basketball could be successful. So it was just a matter of finding the pieces to put it together. So we traded for Nash. We kept our core the same and brought in Quentin Richardson. So
Big Q.
7 seconds or less is all sparked by one thing, a defensive rebound. So if you look at the court, it is Marion getting the defensive rebound on the block, passing it up the court, and then making one final pass across the half-court line. And if they could shoot a three-point shot and they were uncontested, the rules were you did it. If you want to think analytically, it's shoot the ball within 7 seconds or less and, keep the opponent's defense from ever catching up. It required a great rebounder that we had in Marion, and it required a floor general to make that second pass up the court. You also needed three-point shooters on the wings. So you had Joe Johnson and Quentin Richardson. Marion could shoot the three. Nash was obviously a great three-point shooter himself, although he chose not to. So when you factor those pieces in by themselves, that's already a great team. That 04-05 Suns team completely exhausted the rest of the NBA. I mean, the rest of the NBA just could not keep up. And it was unbelievable to watch that transformation. And it's not to say this hasn't happened in the past. Don Nelson was doing this before. And in fact, he was Nash's coach in Dallas. So it's not like Nash wasn't doing these things. It didn't come out of nowhere, but it wasn't mainstream. Anyone who was trying to evoke those principles, still had a classic, five center. It was still a power forward, center dominated game. They weren't pushing the tempo. So the Suns were able to do it with their personnel. And, Quentin Richardson set records that year for three-pointers made. I think he made like 217 three-pointers. Obviously, that's nothing compared to, what Steph Curry's doing today.
Yeah.
However, at the time, no one was shooting three-pointers like that. So between Quentin Richardson and Joe Johnson, we were making a ton of threes. The lanes were open for pick and roll all day long. And, the regular season was ours to have. We went 62-20 that year, you
Jeez.
know,
Yeah.
and the only reason we even lost games was because of Nash's durability. And that was, I hate to say it, his Achilles heel. We were lucky to have the years that we had with him. He really should not have played for as long and as well as he did. We rested him. He's famous for being shown on the sidelines laying on an ice pack, you know, playing 32 minutes a game. A guy of that caliber should be playing 45 minutes a game, every single minute of every possession. And
Well, you have to imagine, I don't mean to cut you off, but you have to imagine, like, I believe the Suns got him when he was 29 or 30. So it's not like they got him in his mid-20s where it's like, okay, he's still got plenty of years left in the tank. And then it showed because as the years went on, I mean, even when Nash became a Laker, he was getting hurt loading luggage onto an airplane.
yeah.
So if you're getting hurt loading luggage onto an airplane, what do you have left? But continue.
Well, I mean that was his problem. He was 6 foot. He was 6'3", 185 pounds, and that was his ideal playing weight because that's what kept him light and lean. The more weight added to his chances of injury. So he had to be light. The Suns also had an incredible athletic training staff, world renowned, in fact. So the Suns knew they could keep him healthy. And they knew that if they limited him to a very specific number of minutes per game and set him up on the court on that ice pack bed, basically, that he laid on, that he could keep his stamina throughout the season. And, he played a majority of games almost every season. So, but that was Mark Cuban's fear, was that he was injury prone. And Dallas did not have the training staff that Phoenix had. So, they were afraid they weren't going to keep him up to shape like they needed to. So they were willing to let him walk. And that was, kind of a puzzle for the Suns to figure out.
Right. And then, so it's interesting because when you think of the Suns, you think it's like you were saying, great regular season team, system team. I mean, that's what D'Antoni is. He's a systematic coach.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to the playoffs, not only was it Nash's durability, but you only really had Leandro Barbosa coming off the bench.
Yeah, disaster.
You weren't very deep, and that's not a knock on Barbosa. I mean, Barbosa was Sixth Man of the Year. It's not a knock on Barbosa. It's just and I understand rotations shrink as you get into the playoffs. You really only rely on about 6 to 7 guys max come the postseason. When you rely on too many, there's more room for error. And that's one of the reasons rotations shrink in the playoffs. But, I mean, we even saw it with our own eyes, how teams just attacked Nash. He got thrown into the stands by the Spurs. And it's just defenses were extremely tough on Steve Nash. And that's what you had to do. He was the facilitator. He was the guy that started the entire engine. And me personally, like, system coaches just aren't, like, I've said this on this podcast before, I'm just not a big guy on system coaches, man. Like, I look at Mike Budenholzer in Milwaukee at the moment, 2 years in a row, number 1 seed, bounced in the third round, and then this year bounced in the second round. It's like when the playoffs happen, the game slows down. And you have to throw your system out the window a lot of the times and kind of take stock in what's happening on the court, and you have to adjust. When you have a system, you can't really adjust because you're so reliant on that system. So,
well, and if you find the Achilles heel to that system, it crumbles. So
right.
You take Nash out of the game, they literally couldn't get the ball up the court. Same thing with Milwaukee. You shut down Antetokounmpo, you keep him out of the lane, force him to make jump shots, disaster. The whole team falls apart. But especially with the Suns, man, when Nash wasn't on the court, it was painful. Go back and watch clips of those teams, from from '04 to '07. No Nash, no game. I'm sorry. Like they weren't even a playoff team, even with all that firepower. They weren't a playoff team when he wasn't on the court. Um, that was such a liability. And every single year I was clamoring for the Suns to take a point guard. Actually, the point guard I wanted at the time, and '04, '05, I really wanted the Suns to draft Luke Ridnour. Like that was the guy. I thought that he was the answer. Um, and they ended up getting Nate Robinson, and unfortunately, he never played for the Suns. So, it was like we were going after these point guards, but we were never keeping them. We were content to find the next Amari Stoudemire. So who they draft that first year? Zarko Chabarkapa was the guy after Amari Stoudemire. They are after Jackson Vroman. You know what these guys were? 6'9" power forwards. That's what we were going after. We were trying to find the next Amari Stoudemire, and we already had him. We needed a backup to Nash. And, the Suns just, it was a matter of positioning. They never got good draft picks. They were either too good some years to get the players they needed or squandered great picks later on. But the fact that they never had a backup to Steve Nash was the reason that they didn't win. The second reason they didn't win is because, they couldn't stop key players in the West. And unfortunately, those two players happened to be on the Spurs. It was Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili. Manu Ginobili torched Joe Johnson in the playoffs. Absolutely killed him on every first step. He just did not have the speed, did not have the quickness. And that was the reason we went after Raja Bell. So if you fast forward 2 years later, there's no Joe Johnson. Quentin Richardson's gone. Our backcourt is Steve Nash and Raja Bell. And Raja Bell brought toughness, brought defense, still shot a lot of threes, really started to plug those holes that we had. So, if we kind of have a list of things that we needed to solve, we solved the Manu Ginobili problem, kind of. I mean, no one really had an answer for him in the mid-2000s. But we did not solve the Tim Duncan problem. So, we tried to with several big men, with Kurt Thomas. That was our best shot. Unfortunately, he got hurt that year. Boris Diaw emerged during his injury. Still couldn't beat the bigs of the West. We lost to the Mavericks that year. And then the following year, we traded for Shaquille O'Neal. And that was Steve Kerr's legacy.
Yep.
And I know you want to talk about Steve Kerr because that, we started off with D'Antoni vision, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Kerr's then calling all the shots.
Right. Okay. So Suns land Steve Kerr. Well, okay. So originally it was Brian Colangelo.
Yep.
And then he just got an offer he couldn't refuse from Toronto. He moved on.
I think he was forced out, but sure, yeah, he definitely got an offer he couldn't refuse. Toronto was willing to give him the entire keys to their team, and Robert Sarver wanted his boy to be making the calls. So Steve Kerr was part of a group, including including Robert Sarver. By the way, all University of Arizona alumni. It's kind of like their little group, and once he made Kerr the GM, it was kind of like he returned the favor to his boy. And meanwhile, pushing out the real genius, the mastermind, Brian Colangelo, who won Executive of the Year, 2 years prior. It just didn't make sense. You could tell it was just, him giving Kerr a favor. And Kerr took the team and said, I'm going to take what D'Antoni was doing, and I'm going to put my spin on it. So that's when he started making moves. And he wasn't wrong. He knew he had to do something about Tim Duncan in the West. So he thought, let's get rid of our rebounding machine and replace him with someone, with a little more size. So, Marion got shipped off to the Heat, became completely irrelevant. I hate to say, he was nothing without a facilitator. And
Right.
then, then Shaq came in. He had an all-star season with the Suns. He wasn't like terrible, but he completely changed the landscape of what we knew of 7 seconds or less. You can't do 7 seconds or less with Shaq. It's impossible.
Right. And not just that, but like I think about okay, so Kerr landed Shaq in it was before the '07 season, correct?
No, it was 2008 actually. It was the 07-08 season.
Okay, so that was then the 66 and 16 Boston Celtics season as
Mm-hmm.
well as Lakers landing Pau Gasol. Okay. So you have to imagine it's like if Pau Gasol was available, it's like don't you try to throw as many assets together to try to get someone like that or Kevin Garnett, who got shipped out the same exact offseason as Shaq got sent to the Suns? So if you're Kerr, it's like, so my answer is going to be Shaquille O'Neal. Okay. I still have, and I'm talking in Kerr stance right now. I still have to deal with Tim Duncan. I still have to deal with Pau Gasol now. And let's just say I happen to get to the finals. I still have to deal with Kevin Garnett and that big three over in Boston. So I just don't, just with the entirety of the Shaq, whatever, year or so, 2 years, I
Yeah.
just don't get it. I don't get it.
They wanted Shaq to be their anchor down low, and Shaq was a super underrated passer. So they thought that between Nash and Shaq, balls were going to be flying everywhere. They thought that assists were going to be coming out left and right. It was going to be, Nash into Shaq, passing it out to Raja Bell for a three, and I think on paper, it makes sense, but like Shaq just demands too much of your time as a coach. He demands too much of your system. And we had to work too much around Shaquille O'Neal being our centerpiece. He didn't really mesh with what we were doing already. I've always said that we needed Ben Wallace. Ben Wallace was the center that the Suns needed. They needed someone who could run the floor, get rebounds. I mean, he was averaging like 13 rebounds a game at the time, 2 blocks. That's what we needed. We didn't need the 22 and 8 from Shaq that we got. We needed 12 and 14 with 3 blocks and a steal. Like that's what the Suns needed. But I think it was a matter of desperation. And I think that Kerr just had his mind set on Shaq. I think he was thinking behind. He wasn't thinking progressively. So you're right. Like we had no shot against the Lakers that year, even if we made it that far, and we certainly weren't going to beat the Celtics. So no matter which way you cut it, the Suns were making the wrong moves at the time, and I hate to say that led to Kerr figuring it out, but Kerr figured it out eventually, right? He eventually got his shot with the Warriors, where he was able to take D'Antoni, he was able to take the triangle offense, he was able to take the pace and space from the Spurs. He got to take every single system he'd ever worked with and put it together with the most talented personnel he had ever seen since he played for the Bulls. I mean, let's be real. Like, there's no one more talented than that Warriors team.
Right. So before we get too far ahead, we'll get to the Warriors because they play a gigantic part in our topic here. But so the Shaq thing doesn't work. You're a first round exit team. 2009 hits once again, not very successful. 2010 hits, new coach. You make it to the conference finals, but Kobe and the Lakers just prove they're just too good.
Too much size.
Their size, they kill you with their size with Pau Gasol and Andrew Bynum. And I mean, there's a Western Conference Finals appearance, but anyway, before we get to the Warriors, it's the Heat that really took what the Suns did, and Eric Spoelstra really took that and just threw it out the window. He said, we're gonna. Yes, I understand you have a generational talent in LeBron James, right? Like, the, of course, anytime you add arguably the third best player to ever play in the history of the NBA, not at that time, but nowadays, you look at the accolades and you can probably say he's a top 5 player of all time easily. But that first year Miami was together, they lost in the finals. And I looked at their starting lineup, and in the finals, I think it was Mike Bibby, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and Eric Dampier. And you look at that personnel against what the Mavs were able to do, and the Mavs could just guard you in every position possible. You had one of the defensive players of the year and Tyson Chandler in the middle to guard the paint. They just had the proper personnel to beat the Heat. The Heat reload over the summer. They add Shane Battier, and this is when they really took that next step. And the reason I'm talking about them is because I want to show what Spoelstra kind of took from the Suns to make them get over the hump. So you fast forward, come playoff time, 2012 playoffs. Chris Bosh, if memory recounts correctly, I don't know if it was the first year or the second year that Bosh got hurt in the playoffs, but I know what Spoelstra decided to do was also Mario Chalmers kind of coming into his own. He was a point guard who was able to defend every position and shoot the three. You've got Wade, no introduction necessary. LeBron, and then for a time in the playoffs, they were actually starting Udonis Haslem at the 4, and then when they really started to figure out is when Bosh was put at the 5.
Yeah,
because you're able to spread the floor, you're able to maximize Bosh's value, which is a pick and pop guy, and it creates more space for LeBron and Wade to operate an offense. Kind of like what the Suns were able to do with Nash. You create more space with more shooting, which gives your guys more driving lanes, which Wade and LeBron were the best at, getting to the hoop. And then playoffs hit, and actually Shane Battier was inserted into the starting lineup. So you had Battier and LeBron playing the 3 and the 4. You've got two guys that can switch the 3 and the 4 spots whenever they want to, and they can both shoot. And you've got Bosh to space the floor for the 5. So basically where I'm going with this is Spoelstra took kind of what the Suns did, but revolutionized it and made it to where all 5 guys can shoot. All 5 guys can defend for the most part. And there really wasn't stopping that team for 2 years. Do you think, how big of an impact would you say the Suns and D'Antoni's system played on the Heat?
I think they legitimized it. I mean, I think before, you were never going to consider putting Shane Battier at power forward. I mean, that's almost ludicrous. 10 years prior, you were considering him as a shooting guard almost. He played small forward. That's his ideal position. But if he was going to play anything besides small forward, it was not going to be power forward. So, Sean Marion made it cool to be a 6'7" power forward, and Amari Stoudemire made it cool to be a 6'9" center. And the thing about the real difference maker for the Heat is the fact that Bosh could, number one, shoot the 3, but he also didn't sacrifice any size. He wasn't undersized really as a center. He played power forward / center for the Raptors for years. So, Amari's biggest problem was that he had no outside shooting capability. He was also getting beat up every single game. He just didn't have the size to compete with the centers at the time. But Bosh did. Bosh had all of those things going for him. Plus, obviously, LeBron doesn't help. Doesn't hurt you at all. But, by the same token, Bosh was the difference maker for that team. No Bosh, no ring. That's how I see it.
Right. And, Bosh had to really, really take a seat, like a step back to say, like, yes, I was the number one guy in Toronto, but you can, and it's like you said, I love how you said that, because you can attribute Bosch's personality to them winning 2 championships. Because it's not easy for a star slash superstar to say, okay, I'm going to be third wheel and let these guys do their thing. Bosch's personality allowed Wade and LeBron to figure out how to play together and how to do this. And it wasn't until Bosch really shifted over to that 5 spot that the Heat really figured out how to play together. So the Heat win the championship that year, they move on. And actually that third year together is the best Heat team that they've ever had. They went 66-16 that year. They won 27 games in a row. I remember they lost on my birthday that year to win the 28th straight against the freaking Bulls. Man, I can't stand Chicago teams. But
the Bulls were that year.
Yeah, and so they get Ray Allen, which only they add Ray Allen as their 6th man of the year, and that only opens up more lanes for LeBron and Wade. That only opens up more guys for LeBron to pass to. And I mean, once again, like, you add more shooting to a team that could already pretty much shoot lights out. I don't want to say lights out, but still a team that was already capable of winning a championship, and you only make them better by adding Ray Allen. So once again, another token of what the Suns did, defend multiple positions, play small, and up, just throw the ball up the court. We're going to have Wade and LeBron be a 2-man fast break team. I mean, That's something the Suns never had. The Suns Nash was always the guy that started these fast break buckets most of the time, but the Suns never had 2 guys that can just take anybody off the dribble full court. And those 2 guys running down the court at the same time was scary. Like, anytime that the Heat got a defensive rebound, you knew it was a bucket. It was a bucket. Like, it was either a foul or a bucket. I mean, there were even commentators. Steve Kerr was a commentator at the time. He was saying, anytime these guys get a defensive rebound, it's either leading to or a turnover. Anytime this team gets a defensive rebound or a turnover, this is leading to a foul or 2 points. And he was right. You couldn't stop these guys in transition. So what the Heat were able to do, just based on what the Suns were able to do, is like, and I don't think Eric Spoelstra ever gets enough credit, because a lot of people want to attribute Spoelstra's championships to, he had LeBron, he had Wade. Spoelstra's a great coach.
Well, I mean, he showed his genius by putting Bosch at the 5, by looking at the 7 seconds or less Suns, by looking at Don Nelson's teams, whether it was the Mavs or the Warriors. I mean, Spoelstra is a genius when it comes to coaching, and he drew from a lot of inspirations that year. And, it took a lot of courage to do the things that he did. And on paper, it made sense. Any basketball analyst would say, yeah, that definitely makes sense. But at the time, it was unprecedented, because you were trying to find ways to plug your big guy down the middle. Where can we get Eric Dampier in there? Or, how can we get Haslam in at the 4? It wasn't about how can we increase our spacing, how can we shoot more threes, how can we give LeBron more lanes, and in turn create more turnovers and more rebounds so that LeBron and Wade could do their thing. It was a system that complemented itself at every corner.
No, it is true. And then, the Suns also the Suns also didn't really have the type of defenders that the Heat had as well. So, like you said, could not stop Ginobili and Duncan.
Okay.
Like the Heat. And, LeBron, it's insane that a 6'8" guy like LeBron can play power forward. Shane Battier, as long as he is, can play the 3 or the 4. So like I said, you've got interchangeable parts that can guard so many different positions and score in so many different ways. It gives you the ability to play differently. And I remember that first year the Heat won their first championship with that dynasty. It was, if you want to call it that. They played the Thunder. And I just remember, like, the Heat can throw just you could throw Battier or LeBron at Durant and say, yeah, we're comfortable with these guys guarding you one-on-one. We don't have to throw multiple guys at you.
Yeah.
And Westbrook was really, I don't know, he was in like his fourth year, so he was establishing himself as a great player. But Durant, we already knew what Durant was. He's one of the best scorers in the league. And just what the Heat were able to do, man, just revolutionize what the Suns did, guard multiple positions and switch anything on defense and score easy points. So let us talk about my favorite team ever, being the Golden State Warriors.
Everyone's favorite team. I feel like they're the Cowboys of basketball. You know, they're like America's team, like, you know, the pretty boys, like they're beautiful, they play awesome basketball, like everyone loves them. They always win. Thank God they sucked this year. Like it was so refreshing to watch them lose. But you're right, they were a wonderful team. They were hard to beat, and you know, we've talked about this a lot, but you know, arguably the best team of all time.
Arguably, I mean, if they would have won that 73-9 season, I mean, how do you not say that like they would have been the best dynasty of all time? It's hard. It's really hard not to. Like I understand that they never accomplished a three-peat and so many other things, but before we list the accolades, man, so I want to say, so Steve Kerr becomes head coach of the Warriors, 2014. And obviously we know Steve Kerr's history. Played with the Bulls, played with some of the best coaches / players of all time. Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, was coached by Phil Jackson, was coached by Greg Popovich, became the GM of the Suns, then moves on, becomes head coach of the Warriors. Obviously, seeing all of these great basketball minds influence Kerr into how he perceived the Warriors to be. Because the Warriors, a lot of the times, were just first-round exit teams before Kerr got there. And, you know, Curry, obviously, we didn't really even know what Curry was until that, because a lot of times he was just shoot. He was a great ball handler. But it wasn't until Kerr got there that really Klay Thompson and Draymond Green developed into what they are, because you can attribute those two guys to Mark Jackson, the head coach.
I was just going to bring up Mark Jackson. You can't forget about Mark Jackson in this equation.
You can't, because Kerr's been asked multiple times, and he's said it. They said, what did you do to make this team such a great defensive-minded team? And Kerr said, honestly, I didn't. And, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but he essentially said, I didn't do anything to really make this team great defensively. That was all Mark Jackson. Yeah. So Mark Jackson developed Klay Thompson and Draymond Green into these great defensive players. Sure, you can always say that they've always had that in them, but you need someone to bring out your potential at times. And Klay developed into one of the best two players in the league, and Draymond developed into one of the best facilitating big men / defenders that we've honestly ever seen. So,
hell you on.
I know. I mean, dude, I can't stand the Warriors, and I can't stand their accolades, but you still have to show some admiration for what they've accomplished. And it's like, so before I go crazy, so 2014 happens, Kerr gets there, and Kerr really took what the Heat did and revolutionized that. So I remember Curry was just kind of a shoot guy, take guys off the dribble, and he also didn't have a lot of depth on that team. So Curry had to really do a lot. Their best guy coming off the bench was Jarrett Jack. Yeah. He was their sixth man coming off the bench. And outside of those guys, there was a lot of responsibility placed on Curry. But Steve Kerr really took what the Heat did and took that to a next level. I remember the Heat were really good with like their back cuts, cutting off the basket, just setting really great screens for LeBron to get a cut to the basket or Wade to cut to the basket. And Steve Kerr really took that and revolutionized Curry's game because Curry was a standstill shooter. I'm going to take you off the dribble and shoot in your face. Curry realized that I can impact the game in more ways than just shooting the ball. So you would have Clay make a screen for Curry. Curry would cut off the ball to the basket for an easy layup. Clay would do the same thing. You could have Draymond guard different positions. And God, let's not forget about Andre Iguodala, because without him, I don't think the Warriors would have won any championships. You know,
Really?
more guys that can defend 4 positions, facilitate, and just do all of those little things that you need that guy to do. Steals, dive on the floor for those balls, say, be another leader for Draymond. Like, how much more did the Warriors need? Like, I don't know, man. Like, what do you think? Because you and I have had so many conversations about the Warriors. Like, was there anything that you've seen from the Warriors that you can take from them and say, wow, like I see a lot of Suns in this?
I mean, the vision of Curry, the shooting ability of Curry, he's Nash 2.0 in a lot of ways. Started out his career super injury prone and has become literally like, the Iron Man. He has hardly missed any games since. He's, unbelievably valuable to the team, even if he's not winning finals MVPs, because he's actually never gotten finals MVPs. Isn't that correct?
No, that is correct.
Surprisingly enough, your most valuable player on the team has never won a finals MVP. But, he's both selfless and demands the ball at the same time. I mean, how do you not give him the ball when it comes down to clutch shots and clutch situations? I mean, only overshadowed by Durant when it comes down to shooting the big shot. So I think that Curry is, everything that Nash wanted to be and more. And, Nash even coached him at one point and taught him how to run the floor like he did. So, I think Draymond Green is a better version of Marion. I see a lot of similarities, but it's really hard to compare because they're totally different teams.
Right. And, I think obviously the Warriors were way better built than the Suns were.
That's what
After, Nash, is Barbosa supposed to run an entire offense? It's like, I look at the Warriors, Curry, Thompson, Harrison Barnes. He was like their first starting small forward.
Yep.
Draymond Green, Andrew Bogut. That was their starting 5. And then off the bench, you could bring Sean Livingston, who couldn't, I don't want to say run an offense, but he was the mid-range master, right? He could shoot the mid-range with the best of them, and he could defend opposing teams' point guards. And then that's not even counting Andre Iguodala. We were just talking about him, how invaluable he was. So you have such a deep team, but you also have 3 guys in Thompson, Iguodala, and Draymond Green that can guard multiple positions, switch onto anybody almost, and facilitate. And then that's not even talking about Curry, and that's not even talking about what Andrew Bogut brought to the table, which is we're going to take pressure off Curry, and Bogut is going to be our defensive anchor, essentially. Like you can say what you want about Draymond and how he's able to guard centers, what he's able to do, but it was hard scoring in the paint on the Warriors with Bogut in the middle of the paint, man. So the Warriors they've defined basketball. And I'm not going to get into Durant. I don't even want to talk about Durant going there. That's stupid. It wasn't even NBA for 2 years, essentially. Like
NBA cheat right there.
Yeah. Seriously. Like, I hate it, but it's like, okay, so we've seen, before we get out of here, we've seen, like you said, the Sun, even before the Suns, Don Nelson was doing this. We've seen Don Nelson and his team. We've seen the Suns, and we've seen the Heat, and then we've seen the Warriors. We've seen quote unquote small ball revolutionize over the course of 20 years or 20 years plus. Do you think that there's ever going to be a team that could revolutionize what the Warriors did even more?
I mean, there has to be, right? I mean, if you say that that won't happen, then the NBA is dead, right? I mean, this isn't the final form of the NBA. Like we're gonna see a change. What that looks like, I don't know. Is it going to be faster? Is it going to be slower again? I guess it all depends. I mean, what do future draft classes look like? Are we seeing more? Are we seeing more centers, or are we seeing more shooters? I think the answer is more shooters. So I think for the short term, we're going to see a faster game. I think we're going to see it evolve. We're going to see, maybe it'll look more like Euroball. I think maybe some of the rules will change. You'll be able to, goaltend more. You'll be able to take it right off the rim. I think it's going to be more improvisational, but, who knows? I mean, I think we're right in the middle of this new NBA of these, this 3-point shooting, 3-and-D game. So it's just a matter of a team coming and breaking the mold. So I don't know. Who do you think it's going to be?
I mean, I still think the Warriors have something left in the tank. So whatever they decide to do, however they decide to make their team better, which is crazy to think, it's not going to be this year with Clay going down again. But next year, if he's ready, the Warriors will be right back in it. So it's tough. It's tough because you have to have the proper personnel, right? Like you need multiple guys that can defend. You need multiple guys that can pass. You need multiple guys that can shoot. And it's easier said than done. You got to find the right guys that match the proper personnel that you already have, for one. And then those guys have to develop. And where is the NBA going to be? Like, is Giannis going to be like that next guy that really defines another generation? I mean, the guy's only 26, right? So I don't know. I think the sky's the limit.
So
So
a hyper athletic small forward who can play positions 2 through 5, but dominates the middle. I mean, is that where you think the game's going? These hyper athletic players?
I man, it's so tough because it's like we like over the course of like the last 5 years, like the best players, LeBron, Giannis, these two guys that can play realistically the 1 through 5, can guard the 1 through 5, can affect the game in every single aspect. But then you look at it, it's not like they've won championships every single year for the past 5-10 years. There's been other teams. So
Yeah.
it's tough to say because then I think of guys like Joel Embiid, and I think of guys like smaller than Giannis and LeBron, like Kawhi Leonard. That's another guy that can guard multiple positions and score the ball, but he can't do the same physical freak things that Giannis and LeBron do. So I don't know, man. I still think there are going to be teams that are going to, speed the game up, pace and space. But can they do it as effectively as some of these teams have in the past? I don't know, man. Curry's a generational player, I mean, it's tough to say. I just love how much talent there is in the NBA. We've never had as much talent as we've had that we have right now. Like, you think about every team in the NBA, and for the most part, every team has quote unquote a star or a superstar. Like you think of like from the Hawks down to like the Hornets. Like okay,
Yeah.
actually the Hornets are actually like a really good example because they're probably one of the only teams in the league that don't actually have like a star. But I don't know, man. I just love where the league is personally as far as like talent.
Yeah, it's anyone's game. Hopefully the Suns game.
Right. Well, yeah, I say let's wrap this one up, man. I really enjoyed talking about dynasties, man. And if you guys love us talking about dynasties, there's dynasties in other sports too. So drop a comment down below. Let me know what you guys thought about this. I also got to thank one of my best friends as well, Nathan, for jumping on and talking dynasty. So thanks again for hopping on, my dude.
Yeah, man, it's been real. Thanks for inviting me.
Not a problem. So subscribe, like, comment all over social media. You listen to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcast. Thanks, guys.